Have you ever wondered why there are so many narcissists in the Muslim community? Let's talk about that. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Hannah. I am a PA who practices medicine and a trauma coach for Muslim women. And this is something I feel like we really need to talk about. So many of the clients that I work with have experienced narcissistic abuse, whether it is from family members, whether it's from in-laws, whether it's from friends or coworkers. But what's alarming to me is how often the narcissists in their life are actually Muslims, and sometimes very practicing Muslims. Let's start off with a definition. What is narcissism? Well, narcissism is actually a trait. It is a characteristic or personality trait where a person has such high levels of self-centeredness, self-involvement that they disregard the needs of other people. Now, like all characteristics or personality traits, narcissism exists on a spectrum. All of us at certain points are a little bit narcissistic in the way we show up in life. But what really makes narcissism dangerous and predatory is when someone displays narcissism constantly and frequently. One of the key features, and there are many key features of narcissism, but one of the key features that are really important to take note of is that people who are chronically narcissistic lack empathy. They are unable or unwilling to see the way that their actions impact other people. They do not have regard for the way that other people feel. It is all about them. At its worst, on the very end of the spectrum is an actual personality disorder that can be diagnosed by mental health professionals, psychiatrists, or PAs like myself, which is narcissistic personality disorder. Now, I'm not saying for people to go out and start naming people and telling them they have narcissistic personality disorder. My intention with this video is to help us get clear on maybe what are some of the reasons why we see what we think is such prominent narcissism among many Muslims in the world and what we can actually do about it. These are also my personal opinions and my personal observations after looking into the literature on narcissism and also working with women from literally across the world who have experienced narcissistic abuse. Let me preface this by saying that there's no way for me to actually measure the number of narcissists that exist in the community or what percentage of Muslims demonstrate narcissistic personality traits, just like it's very hard to do that in the general public because most people who are narcissistic aren't going to admit that it's narcissistic because it kind of goes against narcissism. Part of narcissism is grandiosity, or you think you're better than people, kind of a sense of superiority. So you're not going to apply a label that you know has a negative connotation to yourself like narcissism. So one reason why this might be very common is, first and foremost, the vast majority of Muslims around the world come from communal cultures. Now, what does this have anything to do with narcissism? Communal cultures are incredible and they're beautiful. I come from one. Whether you are Middle Eastern, whether you are from the Indian subcontinent, East or West Africa, or whatever part of the world where there's a huge population of Muslims, communal cultures are incredible, but one thing that they do, for better or worse, is they prioritize the family unit and the community over self. Now, oftentimes what that can all lead to, and this is one of the things that we have to be incredibly mindful of, is disregarding or overlooking individuals who are causing harm. If calling them out on their harm will end up disrupting the continuity or the connection of the family. So for example, there might be an uncle or an aunt or a sibling or a parent who is extremely narcissistic and abusive towards their children. But intervening in that can lead to ruptures. What happens if the narcissistic father, for example, decides that he's never going to show up to his brother's Eid party or to any of their family gatherings because they feel insulted? Now the family unit is disrupted. So what that leads to is so many Muslims suffering in silence, feeling like they can't bring something up to their family because they are going to be blamed for breaking the peace. Well, this is something that hopefully will change over time, but for right now, because of how important this sense of community and connection is to our communal cultures, it can be very difficult to navigate. Another reason why this isn't something we think about too often or hear about publicly is that mental health as a whole is still incredibly taboo in the Muslim community. We are very much in the infancy when it comes to understanding mental health and mental health education as it relates to Islam. And so oftentimes a few things happen. Someone brings up that they are being abused by someone who has narcissistic traits and they are shamed or they're told to get over it, or God forbid that person who's abusing them is their mother or their their father and they are told, well, this is your father, this is your mother. How could you say that they are harming you this way? Be patient, right? There's a lot of spiritual gaslighting that happens when it comes to narcissism in the Muslim community. This is a failure of our Islamic education, that we don't understand that some of the most basic principles of our deen are actually to counter the abuse that comes from narcissism. Actually being able to say that, hey, yes, your parents are your parents and they have a high rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you as a child also have certain rights, and because of that, you're allowed to bring forth those complaints if those rights are being stepped on. Hey, if someone in your family or someone in your community is causing you harm, doesn't matter if they are a scholar of the community who is an imam and has a lot of prestige, or if you are, married to this person. So often we'll have narcissistic husbands who are abusing their wives, and then the woman tries to bring it up to someone and they say, well, that's your husband, you have to obey him. Be patient, right? Marriage is so important, yes, in our religion, but not at the cost of someone's mental well-being. Our deen is one that preserves the dignity of a Muslim, and so when any time we find that is being harmed, and narcissism is a very sinister harm, because so often it goes overlooked and narcissists can get away with a lot. And oftentimes, just by their trait of narcissism, a lot of them are really good at getting other people to like them. This is actually one of the elements when it comes to grandiosity. It's not uncommon to find someone who's extremely narcissistic and abusive towards the people that are closest to them, who has a really good reputation because they know how to play people. They are masters of manipulation. But in Islam, that doesn't matter, because harm is harm, and therefore it has to be addressed when it is brought up. But until we overcome this taboo around these conversations, there are a lot of Muslims that are going to be suffering in the shadows, afraid of bringing things up, afraid of experiencing spiritual gaslighting, afraid that they might bring this to light and then nothing happens and they find themselves humiliated, or their narcissistic abusers find themselves even more empowered to continue the abuse. And with that said, that brings me to my final reason that I think that this is such an unfortunate issue, and that comes to spiritual abuse. Now, I mentioned already that there's no way for me to actually calculate if the percentage of narcissists are higher in the Muslim community or not. And in fact, I would probably argue, if I had to make a hypothesis, it's probably not. I think Islam does a really good job at mitigating that. But why it feels so much more pervasive is because one thing that a Muslim narcissist can do that many other narcissists cannot do is use a tool of spiritual abuse. Now, narcissists will abuse their victims in many ways, but when you can use Islamic scripture, Quran, Hadith, to justify your abuse, the extent of mental gymnastics that your victim has to do to justify standing up to you or calling this issue out or bringing it to a professional is absolutely insane. Because now it's no longer about you and them. It's not about that relationship. It becomes about the relationship that they have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many of us have a very limited understanding of deen and the complexities of our faith. And so we can't sit there and think, well, they're harming me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow for oppression and we have to maintain the dignity of a Muslim. And, one of the age-old maxims in our deen is, no harm should be done. People can't do that, right? So now they're sitting, as an example in a situation I gave when it comes to parents, right? Thinking, well, my mother is abusive, or my father is abusive, or my husband is abusive, or my wife is abusive, and they manipulate me and they make fun of me and they break my self-esteem, and I feel so low next to them, and I'm experiencing depression and I'm going crazy, and I'm getting to a point where I'm feeling like I'm going insane. But then they throw out the hadith about, a woman cannot enter Jannah, a woman whose husband is displeased with her will not enter Jannah. Or they throw out the verses about, worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then your parents are mentioned right after, or wada uff, and don't even say uff to your parents, right? Or they throw the verses around, or they speak about the importance of maintaining your family. Don't you dare consider divorce in this situation. You have to make sure, what about the kids, right? What would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala think about you disrupting the family? The Prophet ﷺ wants an entire ummah to come before him. So now someone starts thinking, by exercising my right, am I actually doing something haram? And that's a whole other level of difficulty and pain. Now, it might seem overwhelming when you hear of all of these reasons, but the reality of it is that narcissism is not new. In fact, I would largely argue that we have an example of a narcissist in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Lahab. And we saw how the Prophet ﷺ navigated that, and we see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala navigated that. Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. right? A literal surah dedicated to discussing the everlasting punishment of Abu Lahab. I say this to say that this is not a place for us to lose hope. As we continue to build up more resources in our community on how to handle this, we are going to, inshallah, be able to tackle it at a global level. But even for now, as a trauma coach, I really believe in working with the individuals who are experiencing the abuse. They learn the tools and they're able to access the resources to actually empower themselves in the face of narcissistic abuse, how to set boundaries, how to build up the self-worth after any narcissistic attacks on them, how to maintain certain ties of kinship and the rights that other people have while at the same time maintaining our God-given dignity. And so if you're a Muslim woman who is wanting to do this work, I have two things for you, so don't skip out now. First, go to the link in my description where you can access my newly launched digital community. In this digital community, you get to experience the power of trauma coaching, and I share lots of resources around all things healing trauma, whether it's narcissistic abuse, childhood trauma, so on and so forth. And if you're someone who is ready to just dive all in and you want to do the work and work with me, I have my 3-month trauma group coaching program where we do this in a systematic, science-based and faith-based way. You can go to the link in my description to also look into that. The digital community is going to be free lifetime entry if you join in June. But even if you're joining after that, it is still incredible value. I truly believe that it is easily worth $500 to $1,000 a month, but I am opening the doors for a very, very, very reasonable investment. Please like this video and subscribe for more if you haven't already. Assalamu alaikum.